I wanted to touch on the Lavia situation because we have seen reports in the last 24 hours that Chelsea have agreed a £55 million deal. It's now been confirmed, or it's gone out the news-wise, that a £60 million deal has been agreed by Liverpool. What's the latest as far as you understand, and where do you believe Lavia is leaning towards and will end up in terms of completing this deal?
Well, it's very fast moving, so I would expect in 24, 48 hours us to get full clarity on this one. Much like Moises Caicedo, even though it's not like for like, it's sort of swung between both clubs. And it's just going to come down to player choice. That's what's being indicated from Southampton. They're prepared to do a deal with both clubs. I'm not so sure that the Chelsea package in full, at least at the time we're live now, has actually been, in inverted commas, accepted. Southampton sources were speaking more over the weekend like it was close, and they believe that financially and structurally that 55 offer with Chelsea was very possible of getting over the line. But Liverpool have now had an actual offer accepted for 60 million. So things are moving quite rapidly, but it's seemingly the case that Chelsea would still need a little bit of work and finalisation on their bid and structure, even though Southampton do indicate that they are prepared to accept that deal. And Liverpool now only have to work on the player side because they do have a package in place. So that's the difference in terms of the club-to-club side, but there's no real suggestion that either side can't get a deal or won't get a deal. Now, I think for Chelsea, it's about determining whether they genuinely want Lavia and Caicedo, and that is what has always been said. So if we take that at its word, then Chelsea will move and be as aggressive as possible. And from Liverpool's point of view, Lavia has obviously been on their radar for a little bit longer. And now, coming back to the player choice, we'll hear conflicting reports, which is normal, about where the player wants to go. And I think that the oscillation of interest is a big part in this because Liverpool were working on Lavia for longer. And at that point, he made it clear that he was very open to that move to Anfield. And then Liverpool didn't agree a deal, believed at the time to be closer to 50 than 60 million. And that's what's interesting about the market. And when you get extra bidders, everything kind of just inflates. And I think that Lavia had a period where he maybe thought this isn't going to get done from Liverpool because they were bidding and bidding and bidding repeatedly. And that's when Chelsea swiftly came in and were more decisive. And that turned Lavia's head a little bit. But make no mistake, this is not quite like Caicedo, because with Caicedo, he really always had Chelsea fixed in his mind. So Liverpool were too late. Whereas with this dynamic, it's the other way around. And Liverpool were the ones that came to the table technically first this summer. But let's not forget, a year ago, Chelsea did make a very audacious £50 million bid to try and get Lavia right at the end of the last summer window. So clearly both sides see Lavia's potential. And it's crazy, really, because he's only played, I think, 25 odd Premier League games. So the fee's going to be over 2 million per Premier League appearance. So it's an investment in his future. And I just wonder in terms of the pitch now, how Caicedo will influence things, because Liverpool have got a clear vacancy for a midfield destroyer in number 6, whereas Chelsea are going to be playing Enzo Fernandez and Caicedo. Where does Lavia fit into this 4-2-3-1 formation in terms of his game time? So there's a few considerations here, but the simple answer at this point is that only Romeo Lavia knows who he's going to pick. It's going to purely come down to player choice. And I think that we'll have an answer within 24 or 48 hours.
Yeah, it's certainly been the last 3 to 4 days with the Lavia Caicedo entanglement between Chelsea and Liverpool has been. And you are obviously a lot closer to this stuff than we are as fans. I don't remember a transfer saga involving 2 players, 2 clubs, world record breaking bids, the ebb and the flow changing so dramatically over a 3 or 4 day period. This, for me, this is unprecedented in terms of transfer activity.
Yeah, it's unprecedented, and it's just the modern window, and Chelsea have changed the market. And obviously Liverpool, Arsenal, even Manchester United, they're quite disciplined in their negotiation. They preempt what rivals are going to do and don't tend to get drawn into bidding wars. And that's how we've sort of described the market. And then with Newcastle, who may get more money over time if they qualify for regular European football, we've also seen a desire by Dan Ashworth and the team led by PIF not to be rash, not to be impulsive. But Chelsea coming in and disrupting deals, even ones that they don't succeed in, has influenced the approaches of Arsenal and of Liverpool and no doubt other clubs going forwards. And I think with Mudryk, it meant that Arsenal had to make a decision very quickly as to whether or not they were going to match the Chelsea package or walk away. They chose to walk away. Whereas with Liverpool, it was the opposite. And instead of just moving on, they actually played Chelsea at their own game with Caicedo, even though they were not successful. And they were the ones being very aggressive. It was a very un-Liverpool-like moment to brief repeatedly from various sources that they weren't going to move Caicedo. They liked the player, but not the price. And then when he was in January, 70, 80, 90 million or whatever the rumours were, and the Arsenal offer came in at that point, again, Liverpool said that's way too high. And suddenly they find themselves bidding a British transfer record. And no doubt Liverpool fans listening are wondering why that money materialised, and yet Liverpool said that it wasn't going to be used for Jude Bellingham. And I suppose the simple answer is just Bellingham also had the agent's fees and a much higher wage. So the overall package of Bellingham was still far more than Moises Caicedo. But now Liverpool are in a difficult position, because when you show your hand in the market and don't succeed, it can be used against you massively. One, because everyone now knows that Liverpool have got 111 million burning a hole in their pocket. And number two, everyone knows that Liverpool are desperate for a number 6 or a midfield destroyer. So you go back to Southampton and maybe say, we want Lavia. What about 49 million? What about 50 million? What about 51 million? And immediately Southampton will probably turn around and say, all along you've been trying for mid-30s through to early 40s, and all along you've had 111 million, and we saw you swoop in and use all of that for Caicedo. So now there's an extra 5-6 million on Lavia, and that's the kind of irony and the shock of the market for both of these transfers, even though Lavia, of course, is still progressing. If anyone had just gone right at the beginning of the window and said, here's 100 million for Moises Caicedo, they'd have ended up getting a 15 million discount. If anyone had gone to Southampton at the beginning of the window and said, here's your 50 million for Lavia, immediately after they'd have gone down, they'd have got a 10 million discount. But now we're at the point where Lavia might go for 60 million. Caicedo's gone for a total package of 150 million. And that is a reflection of the market being disrupted, of prices being inflated, and of sellers actually having a rare amount of ascendancy, because traditionally in terms of patterns, the January window is a seller's market, the summer window is a buyer's market. But in terms of actually getting prices and negotiating, the selling clubs, financially speaking, seem to have come out on top. We've seen that with Declan Rice. We've seen that with Moises Caicedo. We'll see that with Romeo Lavia. We might see that with Lucas Paquetá if he leaves for Manchester City. And I think, therefore, clubs have to be very disciplined in who they want and what they're prepared to pay. Because once you show your hand like Liverpool, this is the knock-on effect. They've put that money down, and suddenly the Lavia fee they've agreed has had to have an increase of somewhere in the region of 14 million from their last bid. And as I said before, that's very un-Liverpool-like.
Yeah, listen, 110%. And look, we're getting all these updates coming through, like you said. According to Tom Roddy, who I know you'll be familiar with, Lavia has indicated a desire to move to Chelsea. People are saying that's just been published by him, and I'm sure there'll be reports saying things in the other direction. So it's a very, very intriguing deal, a very intriguing situation in terms of what direction this is going to go in. But you're right, it's been a very strange summer, and for years that the notion of low ball as the opening offers and work the selling club down has worked. This summer we've seen a few occasions where that hasn't come to fruition. And maybe we're going to see a complete change as the Saudi money enters European football through purchases, as the Premier League continues to grow in terms of its revenue. Maybe we're just seeing at the beginning of a shift in terms of how to get deals done. Just pay that asking price day one. It may end up being cheaper for you in the long run. Staying with Chelsea, Ben, there's talks that the deal for Elise is becoming ever closer. What's your understanding regarding that and Chelsea's pursuit of the young winger from Crystal Palace?
Yeah, Chelsea was sort of weighing up Mohamed Kudus and Elise, and it looks like they're moving in the direction of Elise. The personal terms have never really been a problem. And in fact, there was a, broadly speaking, agreement on the player side for quite some time. So Chelsea have always been close on that side. It's just about the package. And there's always been this dispute and these conflicting sources about the so-called release clause that Elise either does or doesn't have. Some sources had indicated it was there, and others have made it clear that it was removed. So Chelsea have had to explore that situation to work out what's possible. What I know at this point is that the previous reports of 35 million being the number are incorrect to my knowledge. So if Chelsea are to proceed here, it's going to be a deal more like at 45 million. And then we have to wait and see whether that is matching any kind of clause to trigger the move, or if Chelsea, as they prefer to do usually, pay a bit more and try and get a deal which is on their own terms and structure. So Palace have always had the position they don't want to sell. They're adamant that he's part of their plans, which is why if there is to be a clause of sorts, it will obviously benefit in many ways Chelsea, because then they can take Palace out the equation.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Good player, good at what he does in terms of the attacking sense there. I'll just read one of these comments that come through. How can Chelsea get away with spending $1 billion? It's crazy. Well, again, amortization and spreading those costs over long-term contracts is why. AA here says, what is it with Liverpool? Why a player like Caicedo wouldn't want to accept them? It's London, and a better contract was a big reason. There's a lot of speculation that Chelsea are only getting all these players, Ben, because they're prepared to pay. They're basically overpaying. They're just going down the mercenary route of just offering ridiculous wages, ridiculous salaries in comparison. Is there any truth to that as far as you're aware?
No, I think that it's a different project. It's as simple as that. And the Chelsea project is to offer long-term contracts and incentives, and people are buying into the Pochettino era. They are being well compensated. But remember, Chelsea are in a phase without European football. And in addition to that, they have incentive-driven contracts. So if you walk into Chelsea now, your number might say one thing, but it's only going to go up to that number if you get European football. And everyone at Chelsea that's part of the new incentives has had a decrease as far as their package is concerned. So it's not all about money at Chelsea. It's about project, and it's about patience for a player. And when you're a young player and a club like Chelsea come along and say they want to invest, it's really important to that player because they feel like they get a pathway there. And of course, the Chelsea notion is to pay these young players more. And then when they grow into their price tag and their potential, and Lavia, remember, is only 19 years of age, suddenly Chelsea are the ones that get the great deal. Whereas Liverpool perhaps are a bit more conservative at this stage with a 19-year-old and the wages they might offer, but it's more consistent in terms of the project, and there is European football. So with Lavia, you can argue it both ways. With Caicedo, I think that the turning down, in inverted commas, of Liverpool was just down to the fact that they entered the race too late. So Liverpool had Caicedo on their radar when he was at IDV, but they didn't want to do that deal because there were all kinds of hidden costs and agents' fees. And they've tracked Caicedo without ever moving. And by the time they moved, Chelsea had done all the legwork. So Caicedo had locked in his plans for the season. He somewhat forced the move to Chelsea. It was simply too late for Liverpool. It's not a snub on Liverpool as a football club or an institution. It's just the fact that Chelsea handled the player side a little bit better. And that's why Caicedo ultimately ended up picking the move to Stamford Bridge. He'd already spoken to Chelsea players. He'd already planned for that move. It's a personal decision as well as a professional decision. And I think that that's always worth pointing out, that footballers don't just make their decisions based on football. Declan Rice wanted Arsenal for Arteta, for Champions League football, of course, for money, but also because it was the right move for him and his family. And it was London. James Maddison, the same, wanted to move to London, decided to join Spurs. Newcastle became aware of that and moved in another direction. So sometimes we make this about one club being better or one club being bigger, but it's just about a right fit. And of course, the finances are one part of that. Yeah. And I think the last thing I'd say with Caicedo is that everyone's wrongly saying that Paul Winstanley somehow handled the negotiations and as a co-sporting director couldn't get that deal done, and then the owners had to step in. And that's simply untrue. Chelsea's process is collaborative. And one of the reasons they got Caicedo was because Paul Winstanley has a relationship with the player and has known the player since he was 15 years of age or something around that time. And then towards the end of the deal in the final negotiations, Bedag Eghbali did drive and be a big part of it. But that doesn't mean that Winstanley wasn't involved. It's kind of a team effort. So Chelsea have done quite well at throwing people at negotiation. Yes, throwing money at negotiation, but also being fast. Whereas Liverpool are a bit slower, a bit more consistent, a bit more methodical, and that also works sometimes. So I think what we're just seeing here is two different kinds of models. And ultimately, when the players decide between the clubs, it comes down to a bit of everything. It comes down to money, it comes down to narrative, it comes down to how fast you move, it comes down to the managers, it might come down to location. There's never one rule. So we shouldn't be billing this as Chelsea are bigger than Liverpool or Liverpool are bigger than Chelsea. We should be billing this as every transfer and player is a unique situation. And all of those variables that I outlined are the ultimate reason why they may pick one club or the other.
Absolutely. And I think that, there's a lot of people turning into, as this super chat here says, Liverpool fans turning into financial advisors on Chelsea's finances. I keep saying it to people. No one reads enough about their rivals. Chelsea are doing trying to raise funds for investment. They've got a number of new sponsors on the way. The fact that they've done a thematic review into their finances and reported themselves for mismanagement of finances in the past tells you they're all over this. The idea that they are going to accidentally come a cropper to FFP, in my opinion, is just crazy. We all know they're going to slow their spending down over the coming years. They've also got to save a lot of money, in my opinion, on these players if they do well when it comes to renewal of contracts. Because rather than having people on 4-year deals where in 2 years, if Caicedo was killing it, he might suddenly ask for 350 grand a week. They've got him tied in for 8 years. They don't even have to worry about renewals on these players for 4 or 5 years, which means their wage bill is probably going to remain far more static than rivals. Now, of course, if it goes wrong for Chelsea and these players flop, it's a different conversation. But you can't cross that bridge until you get there, as far as I'm concerned. Just in the interest of time, we're going to come back to Chelsea viewers in a little while because Ben's on a bit of a hard stop with us today because he's busy working in Saudi.